Let's be honest, AI is absolutely everywhere. The hype is just massive, right? We're seeing billions and billions of dollars pouring in, and it really feels like we're on the brink of some huge technological revolution. But with all that excitement, a really crucial question is starting to bubble up. Is this all real, sustainable growth? Or are we living in a giant AI bubble that's just about to pop?
So yeah, that's the big question on everyone's mind. From investors on Wall Street all the way down to the developers who are actually building these tools. Is this AI gold rush going to last, or is a sharp, painful correction just waiting around the corner? In this explainer, we're going to break down both sides of this argument and try to figure out what's really going on behind all the headlines.
Okay, so before we dive in, let's make sure we're all on the same page. What even is a tech bubble? It's not just about hype. It's a pretty specific thing. It's when the excitement and the money, the investment, get so far ahead of the actual real-world value that the market eventually has to snap back to reality. And yeah, that snapback is often pretty painful.
All right, let's start with the case for yes, we are absolutely in an AI bubble. You know, the alarm bells are definitely ringing, and if you look closely, the evidence is really starting to pile up.
So the whole argument for a bubble pretty much rests on these 5 key pillars. We're talking about companies valued in the billions that have little to no profit. We're seeing shockingly low returns on a ton of these projects. And as we're about to see, there are some very real and very, very expensive physical and legal roadblocks ahead. And listen, this isn't just coming from some random tech critics. This is a direct warning from the Bank of England. Now, when a massive financial institution like that says valuations are overstretched, what they're really saying is that a lot of a company's value is built on feelings and hype, not solid fundamentals. And we all know how quickly sentiment can change, like overnight.
Okay, now this number right here, this is where the hype collides with a really harsh reality. A study highlighted in Yale Insights found that a staggering 95% of the generative AI investments they looked at yielded zero return. Let that sink in. That is a huge disconnect between the money pouring in and the actual value coming out.
And this chart just brilliantly illustrates one of the biggest and maybe most overlooked problems, the physical cost. See, AI is incredibly power hungry. In regions with a ton of data centers, wholesale electricity prices have just soared by as much as 267%. That is a very real and frankly a very unsustainable cost. And this gets to a really crucial point. AI isn't just code floating around in the cloud. It depends on massive, real-world physical infrastructure. We're talking about hitting the limits of our power grids, facing serious hardware shortages, and using enormous amounts of water just for cooling these data centers. And here's the kicker. What happens if a new, more efficient technology comes along and makes today's billion-dollar infrastructure totally obsolete?
Okay, that is a pretty convincing case for a bubble, right? But it's not the whole story. Let's flip the coin and look at the other side of the argument. Why might the core of AI actually survive all this, even if a lot of the froth and the hype just disappears?
Now, the key to this whole survival argument is making a really critical distinction. On one side, you've got thousands of these smaller, specialized AI tools. They're expensive to run, and they're super vulnerable to competition. But on the other side, you have these giant, scalable platforms. And the argument is that these are two completely different beasts, and they are not going to suffer the same fate. So what makes these big platforms so much more durable? Well, for one, their massive scale helps them absorb those insane infrastructure costs. They're also in a constant race to get more efficient, which brings costs down. Plus, they have actual business models that work, like subscriptions and enterprise licenses. And maybe most importantly, they benefit from something called network effects. Basically, the more developers build on their platform, the more essential and indispensable they become. So what we have here are two really powerful arguments. One for a bubble and one for survival. And the most likely outcome probably isn't one or the other, but a mix of the two. Think of it less like a total collapse and more like a great shakeout, where the weak get filtered out and the strong, well, they just get stronger. And this brings us to the really practical question, right? If a correction is coming, who is most at risk? Which parts of this huge AI ecosystem are actually standing on shaky ground? Let's use a really concrete example, those AI video generators that go viral all the time. They seem totally magical, but they're a perfect case study for this shakeout. First off, generating video is incredibly expensive, way more than text or images. Second, mimicking artistic styles, like saying, make it Ghibli-style, is a legal minefield. And for a lot of people, the novelty might just wear off. This is the exact profile of a service that might not survive a big market correction. So all of this seems to be pointing towards a future that's going to be defined not by a crash, but by consolidation. The AI landscape in a few years is probably going to look very, very different than it does today.
This table really sums up the most probable outcome. What seems almost certain is that a lot of the smaller, niche startups will either fail or get bought up. The market's going to consolidate around a few giant backbone platforms, and being efficient is going to be the key to survival. What's way harder to predict is who are the winners going to be? And could a new technology or a new regulation just come in and completely change the game?
And this brings us to the final thought here. While it looks like a bubble might pop for parts of the AI market, the core technology itself is almost certainly here to stay. So the real debate isn't about survival, it's about what this coming consolidation means for all of us. The question really isn't if AI survives, it's which AI, which platforms, which companies, and which ideas will ultimately get to define our future.